In the mist-shrouded mountains of 15th century Wallachia, a figure emerged whose name would become synonymous with cruelty and terror. Vlad III Dracula, more infamously known as Vlad the Impaler, ascended to the throne in 1456, ushering in an era of unprecedented brutality that would leave an indelible mark on European history. His reputation was such that the Italian chronicler Antonio Bonfini wrote, "He was a man of incredible ferocity and unheard-of cruelty, a scourge to all mankind." Born in November or December 1431 in Sighisoara, Transylvania, Vlad was the second son of Vlad II Dracula, a member of the Order of the Dragon. This knightly order, dedicated to defending Christianity against the Ottoman Empire, would lend its name to the family, Dracula, meaning son of the dragon. Little did anyone know that this dragon's offspring would breathe fire and terror across the land. The house where Vlad was born still stands today in Sighisoara's citadel, marked with a plaque, and now housing a restaurant that serves Dracula-themed dishes. Vlad's early years were marked by tumult and tragedy. In 1442, he and his younger brother Radu were sent as hostages to the Ottoman court of Sultan Murad II in Adrianople, modern-day Edirne, Turkey. This period of captivity would shape the young prince, instilling in him a deep hatred for the Ottomans and a ruthless approach to power. It was during this time that Vlad likely learned the cruel method of impalement from his Ottoman captors. Upon his return to Wallachia in 1448, Vlad found his father and elder brother murdered, victims of a conspiracy by Wallachian boyars. His father, Vlad II, had been buried alive by the boyars of Targoviste, while his elder brother Mircea had been blinded with hot irons and buried alive. Seizing the throne in 1456, Vlad embarked on a reign that would become legendary for its brutality. His preferred method of execution, impalement, earned him his grisly moniker. This horrific practice involved forcing victims onto sharpened wooden stakes, often arranged in concentric circles around cities or on hillsides. The agony could last for days, with some accounts describing victims lingering for weeks before succumbing to their wounds. Vlad was known to vary the height of the stakes according to the victim's rank or crime, creating a macabre forest of suffering. He even had stakes, lacquered and rounded, to prevent the victims from sliding off too quickly, thus prolonging their agony. One of the most infamous incidents occurred on St. Bartholomew's Day, April 24, 1459, when Vlad invited hundreds of boyars and their families to an Easter feast in Targoviste. These nobles, whom he suspected of disloyalty, were impaled on the spot. The exact number of victims is disputed, but some chronicles put it at around 500. Vlad then forced the remaining nobility to march 50 miles to Puanari, where they were put to work rebuilding an old mountaintop castle that would become one of his strongholds. This fortress, now known as Puanari Castle, still stands today on a cliff overlooking the Arge River, a testament to Vlad's paranoia and cruelty. Vlad's sadism knew no bounds. In 1462, he allegedly nailed Turkish envoys' turbans to their heads when they refused to remove them in his presence, citing religious custom. This act of sacrilege and cruelty was a clear message to the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II. Vlad would bow to no one. According to the Greek historian Leonikos Chalkokondailis, Vlad justified this action by saying, "I have done this to you so that you may learn to keep your customs even when you go to foreign countries." The scale of Vlad's atrocities is staggering. Contemporary reports claim that he impaled 20,000 people outside the city of Brasov in 1460. While this number may be exaggerated, it speaks to the terror he inspired. A German pamphlet from 1521 describes how Vlad ordered the impalement of 600 Transylvanian merchants in a single day, their bodies left to rot in the sun. This event was likely in retaliation for Brasov's support of his rival, Dan III, and to punish the merchants for perceived economic exploitation of Wallachia. Yet Vlad's cruelty was not without purpose. His reign coincided with the Ottoman Empire's expansion into Europe, and he saw himself as a bulwark against Islamic encroachment. In 1462, when Sultan Mehmed II led a massive invasion force of 150,000 men into Wallachia, Vlad employed scorched earth tactics and guerrilla warfare. He poisoned wells, burned crops, and conducted night raids that sowed confusion and terror among the Ottoman ranks. One such raid, known as the Night Attack, took place on June 17, 1462. Vlad, disguised as a Turkish soldier, led a small force into the Ottoman camp, nearly reaching the Sultan's tent before being driven back. The culmination of this campaign was the infamous Forest of the Impaled. As the Ottoman army approached Targovist, they were confronted by a forest of 20,000 impaled corpses stretching for miles. The sight was so horrifying that it is said Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, turned back in disgust. A chronicler accompanying the Sultan wrote, "The Sultan's army came across a field with stakes, about 3 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide, and there were large stakes on which they could see the impaled bodies of men, women, and children, about 20,000 of them. There were babies clinging to their mothers on the stakes, and birds had made nests in their entrails." Vlad's reputation for cruelty extended beyond the battlefield. He was said to dine among forests of impaled victims, sometimes dipping his bread in their blood. One story tells of how he had the noses of Turkish prisoners cut off and sent back to the Sultan in sacks, along with a letter boasting that his men had killed 23,884 Turks. Another anecdote describes how he once invited all the sick and poor of Wallachia to a great feast, only to lock them in the banquet hall and set it ablaze, claiming he was freeing them from their misery. Despite his brutality, or perhaps because of it, Vlad maintained a semblance of order in his realm. He was known for his strict enforcement of honesty and chastity. According to legend, he placed a golden cup in the central square of Targovisti. The cup remained untouched throughout his reign, as thieves feared the consequences of stealing it. This tale is immortalized in a poem by the Romanian poet Mihai Eminescu, who wrote, "At Targovist in the square, a golden cup has been installed. No thief dares steal it there, for fear of Vlad, the one impaled." Vlad's reign was not uninterrupted. He was deposed in 1462 and spent years in captivity in Hungary under King Matthias Corvinus. During this time, he was held in the Visegrad castle and later in Buda. Interestingly, it was during this period of captivity that Vlad is said to have met his second wife, believed to be a cousin of Matthias. He briefly regained the throne in 1476, only to be killed in battle later that year near Bucharest. The exact circumstances of his death remain a mystery, with some accounts claiming he was betrayed by his own men. His head was allegedly cut off and presented to the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II as proof of his demise. The legacy of Vlad the Impaler is complex. In Romania, he is often viewed as a harsh but just ruler who defended his land against foreign invaders. His image appears on Romanian postage stamps, and there are numerous statues of him throughout the country. To much of the Western world, however, he remains a symbol of sadistic cruelty, his name forever linked to the fictional vampire Count Dracula, created by Bram Stoker in 1897. Stoker's character was inspired in part by Vlad's reputation for cruelty and his patronymic, Dracula. Vlad's life and reign continue to fascinate historians and the public alike. His castle in Bran, although not historically associated with Vlad himself, has become a major tourist attraction known as Dracula's Castle. The real Punari Castle, where Vlad actually lived, is less visited but offers a more authentic connection to the historical figure. Archaeologists continue to search for Vlad's tomb, with some believing it may be located in the monastery on Snagov Island, north of Bucharest. As the Romanian historian Negu Juvara wrote, Vlad Dracula was a man of his time, a time when life was cheap and death was everywhere. He was cruel, yes, but he was also a defender of his land and his faith. Rome's Inferno, the reign of Nero, Emperor of Nightmares. In the annals of history, few names evoke such a potent mixture of fascination and revulsion as that of Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. Born on December 15, 37 AD in Antium, Italy, Nero would rise to become the fifth Roman emperor, ruling from 54 to 68 AD. His reign would be remembered not for its triumphs, but for its excesses, cruelty, and the indelible mark it left on the psyche of Western civilization. As the Roman historian Suetonius would later write in his work, The 12 Caesars, Nero was a man who spared no expense and dreamed of the impossible. As the last of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, Nero ascended to the throne at the tender age of 16, following the suspicious death of his great-uncle and adoptive father, Emperor Claudius. Whispers of matricide already swirled around the young ruler, as many believed his domineering mother, Agrippina the Younger, had poisoned Claudius to secure her son's position. The Roman historian Tacitus reports that Agrippina used a dish of poisoned mushrooms to end Claudius's life, a detail that has fascinated historians for centuries. Little did Rome know that this was merely the prelude to a reign that would be defined by bloodshed and madness. The early years of Nero's rule showed promise, guided by the steady hands of his advisors, the philosopher Seneca and the praetorian prefect Burrus. During this period, known as the Quinquennium Neronis, or Nero's 5 good years, the empire enjoyed relative peace and prosperity. Nero reduced taxes, gave assistance to cities destroyed by natural disasters, and allowed slaves to file complaints against unjust masters. Yet, beneath the surface, a power struggle simmered between the young emperor and his overbearing mother. In 59 AD, this tension reached its horrifying climax when Nero ordered the assassination of Agrippina. The Roman historian Tacitus vividly recounts the botched attempt to sink her ship off the Bay of Naples, followed by her brutal murder at the hands of Nero's men. As she faced her killers, Agrippina is said to have cried out, "Smite my womb," the very body part that had given birth to her murderous son. This matricide shocked even the hardened sensibilities of ancient Rome and marked a turning point in Nero's reign. With the shackles of his mother's influence cast off, Nero's reign took a dark turn. He indulged in extravagant spectacles, lavish feasts, and artistic pursuits, often at the expense of state affairs. The emperor fancied himself a great artist, forcing audiences to endure hours-long recitals of his poetry and musical performances. Those who dozed off or attempted to leave were severely punished, with reports of soldiers sealing the doors to trap spectators inside. Suetonius recounts that women in the audience would give birth and men would feign death to escape these tedious performances. Nero's artistic delusions reached their zenith when he competed in the Olympic Games of 67 AD, bribing officials to postpone the Games for a year so he could participate. Despite falling off his chariot and failing to finish the race, Nero was awarded the victory crown in every event he entered. But it was on the night of July 18th, 64 AD, that Nero's name would be forever etched in infamy. A great fire erupted in Rome, raging for 6 days and 7 nights, reducing much of the city to ashes. The blaze began in the shops around the Circus Maximus and quickly spread, destroying 3 of Rome's 14 districts and severely damaging 7 others. While Nero was in Antium at the outbreak of the blaze, rumors quickly spread that he had ordered the conflagration to clear space for his grand architectural projects. The image of Nero playing his lyre while Rome burned, though likely apocryphal, captured the public's imagination and has endured as a symbol of his callousness. Some accounts even suggest that Nero watched the fire from the Tower of Maecenas, reciting his poem about the fall of Troy. The Roman poet Juvenal later scathingly wrote, "Who wouldn't want to scribble satires when confronted with a city like this?" In the wake of the fire, Nero launched a massive rebuilding program, including the construction of his opulent Domus Aurea, or Golden House. This sprawling palace complex covered nearly 200 acres and featured gold-leafed ceilings, precious gems, and even a 120-foot-tall statue of the emperor himself, known as the Colossus Neronis. The rotating dining room, which constantly sprinkled guests with perfume and flower petals, became legendary. To fund this extravagance, Nero debased the Roman currency and increased taxes, further straining an already burdened populace. The philosopher Seneca remarked, He robs, he plunders, he despoils, he denies nothing to himself. Nothing does he refuse himself, nothing does he spare. Seeking a scapegoat for the fire, Nero turned his wrath upon the city's Christian community. The historian Tacitus describes the gruesome spectacle that followed. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt to serve as a nightly illumination when daylight had expired. This persecution marked one of the earliest and most brutal attacks on Christians in Roman history. Christian tradition holds that it was during this persecution that the apostles Peter and Paul were martyred in Rome. Nero's sadistic tendencies knew no bounds. He is said to have kicked his pregnant wife, Poppaea Sabina, to death in a fit of rage in 65 AD. He ordered Seneca, his former tutor, to end his life on suspicion of conspiracy in the same year. The philosopher, forced to open his veins, is said to have faced death with stoic calm, comforting his weeping friends with the words, "What need is there to weep over parts of life? The whole of it calls for tears." The emperor even had the young Rufius Crispinus, his stepson from a previous marriage, drowned by his own slaves while fishing, allegedly because the boy played at being a general with his friends. As his paranoia grew, so did the list of his victims. In 65 AD, the Pisonian conspiracy, a plot to assassinate Nero and replace him with Gaius Calpurnius Piso, was uncovered. The emperor's retribution was swift and merciless. Dozens of Rome's most prominent citizens were pressured to end their own lives or face execution, including the poet Lucan and Petronius, the author of the Satyricon. Lucan, as he bled to death, is said to have recited lines from his epic poem Pharsalia describing a soldier's death. The purge was so extensive that Tacitus wrote, "It was like a massacre of the nobility." Despite his cruelty, Nero cultivated a populist image, often mingling with the common people in taverns and brothels. He sponsored lavish games and distributed food to the masses, earning him some measure of popularity among the lower classes. The Saturnalia festival, traditionally a time when social norms were upended, became increasingly elaborate under Nero's rule. He even participated in public chariot races and gladiatorial contests, shocking the aristocracy but delighting the masses. Yet as his reign progressed, discontent simmered among the elite and the military. In 68 AD, the storm that had been brewing finally broke. Gaius Julius Vindex, governor of Gallia Lugdunensis, rebelled against Nero's rule. Though Vindex was defeated, his actions sparked a chain of events that would lead to Nero's downfall. The Spanish legions declared for Galba, and the Praetorian Guard in Rome abandoned the emperor. The Senate, emboldened by Nero's weakening position, declared him a public enemy. Facing inevitable defeat, Nero fled Rome with a handful of loyal servants. On June 9, 68 AD, in a villa outside the city belonging to his freedman Phaon, the once mighty emperor prepared to take his own life. His famous last words, "What an artist dies in me, qualis artifex pereo," perfectly encapsulated the delusions of grandeur that had defined his reign. Even in his final moments, Nero struggled to find the courage to end his life, lamenting, "How ugly and vulgar my life has become." It was only with the help of his secretary, Epaphroditos, that he finally drove the dagger into his throat. Nero's death marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and plunged Rome into a period of civil war known as the Year of the Four Emperors. Yet even in death, his shadow loomed large over the empire. For years afterward, several impostors emerged claiming to be Nero, playing on the fears and hopes of the populace. These false Neros gained significant followings, particularly in the eastern provinces, demonstrating the complex legacy the emperor left behind. The reign of Nero stands as a cautionary tale of absolute power, corrupting absolutely. His legacy is one of excess, cruelty, and madness, forever synonymous with tyranny in the Western imagination. As the Roman poet Juvenal would later write, "Is there any wickedness alien to that monster?" In Nero, Rome had truly found its emperor of nightmares. Yet his impact on Roman culture was undeniable. The Colosseum, begun by Vespasian, was built on the site of Nero's pond in the Domus Aurea, perhaps as a way to return to the people what Nero had claimed for himself. The phrase Nero's fiddle entered the lexicon as a symbol of irresponsibility in the face of disaster. The Iron Fist of Rus, Ivan the Terrible's reign of blood and fear. In the frost-bitten lands of 16th century Russia, a figure emerged whose very name would send shivers down the spines of his subjects and enemies alike. Ivan IV Vasilievich, known to history as Ivan the Terrible, ascended to the throne in 1547, ushering in an era of unprecedented brutality and paranoia that would forever alter the course of Russian history. As the Russian historian Nikolai Karamzin would later write, the name of Ivan the Terrible froze on people's lips. Born on August 25, 1530, in the ancient city of Kolomenskoye near Moscow, Ivan was the long-awaited heir to the Rurikid dynasty. His early years were marked by tragedy and turmoil, as he lost both parents by the age of 8. His father, Vasily III, died when Ivan was just 3 years old, and his mother, Elena Glinskaya, who served as regent, was likely poisoned 5 years later. The young prince grew up in a world of court intrigues, witnessing firsthand the brutal power struggles among the boyars, Russia's noble class. These formative experiences would shape Ivan into a ruler consumed by suspicion and rage. In his later writings, Ivan would recall how the boyars stalked through the palaces of my father as if they were their own houses, and how they seized power, giving no thought to us. At the tender age of 16, Ivan was crowned Tsar of all the Russias on January 16, 1547, in the Dormition Cathedral of the Moscow Kremlin. He was the first ruler to claim this lofty title, which derived from the Latin Caesar. Initially, his reign showed promise. He implemented reforms, revised the law code known as the Sudebnik in 1550, and even convened the first Russian parliament, the Zemsky Sobor, in 1549. Ivan also oversaw the conquest of the Khanates of Kazan, 1552, and Astrakhan, 1556, greatly expanding Russia's territory. But beneath this veneer of progress lurked a growing darkness that would soon engulf the nation. The turning point came in 1560 with the death of Ivan's beloved first wife, Anastasia Romanovna. Consumed by grief and paranoia, Ivan became convinced that she had been poisoned by treacherous boyars. This event marked the beginning of Ivan's descent into madness and tyranny. He began to see enemies everywhere, even among his closest advisors. The once promising ruler began to withdraw from public life, his mood swinging violently between pious reflection and murderous rage. In 1565, Ivan shocked his court by abdicating the throne and retreating to the town of Alexandrov, some 112 kilometers northeast of Moscow. He sent 2 letters, one to the Orthodox clergy, accusing the boyars of treason and embezzlement, and another to the boyars themselves, renouncing the throne. This dramatic move threw the country into chaos. After a month of uncertainty, a delegation of boyars and clergy traveled to Alexandrov to beg Ivan to return. His return came at a terrible price, the creation of the Oprichnina, a state within a state that would become the instrument of Ivan's terror. The Oprichniki, his personal guard and secret police, dressed in black and rode black horses, carrying dogheads and brooms as symbols of their duty to sniff out treason and sweep away Ivan's enemies. As Ivan himself proclaimed, "I have the will and the power to reward my servants and to punish disobedience." The Oprichnina unleashed a reign of terror across Russia. Entire cities were razed to the ground on Ivan's orders. In 1570, the prosperous city of Novgorod fell victim to Ivan's paranoid wrath. Suspecting the city of plotting to defect to Poland-Lithuania, Ivan led his Oprichniki on a 6-week rampage. Contemporary accounts speak of up to 60,000 people massacred, their bodies clogging the Volkhov River. The Archbishop of Novgorod, Pimen, was sewn into a bearskin and hunted to death by Ivan's dogs. The Oprichniki systematically looted the city, destroying centuries-old monuments and burning crops in the surrounding countryside. The German merchant Johann Taube, an eyewitness to the massacre, wrote, "Men and women, old and young, were drowned in the river, impaled, hanged or cut to pieces. The streets were filled with corpses. Ivan's cruelty knew no bounds, even within his own family. In a fit of rage in November 1581, he struck his pregnant daughter-in-law, Elena Sheremeteva, causing her to miscarry. When his son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich, confronted him about this, the Tsar flew into a murderous frenzy. He struck his son on the head with his iron-tipped staff, dealing a fatal blow. As his son lay dying, Ivan reportedly cried out in anguish, "May I be damned! I've killed my son! I've killed my son!" This act of filicide would haunt Ivan for the rest of his days and leave Russia's succession in crisis. The famous 19th century painting by Ilya Repin, Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan, dramatically depicts this tragic moment, capturing the horror and remorse on Ivan's face as he cradles his dying son. The Tsar's sadistic tendencies extended to elaborate and gruesome forms of execution. One of his favorite methods was to have victims boiled alive in large pots or cauldrons. Others were impaled, hanged, beheaded, or torn apart by wild horses. In one particularly horrific incident, Ivan allegedly had a French ambassador burned alive inside an iron cage for refusing to remove his hat in the Tsar's presence. The Tsar was known to take personal pleasure in devising new methods of torture. He reportedly ordered Prince Mikhail Repnin's feet to be nailed to a wooden floor before having him hacked to pieces for refusing to participate in one of Ivan's drunken revelries. Ivan's personal life was as tumultuous as his reign. He had 7 wives, though only the first 3 were recognized by the Orthodox Church. His later marriages were considered illegitimate, and some of his brides met mysterious and untimely ends. One, Maria Dolgorukaya, was reportedly drowned the day after their wedding when Ivan accused her of not being a virgin. Another, Vasilisa Melentieva, was said to have been buried alive when Ivan caught her with a lover. The Tsar's marital history was so notorious that it inspired the Russian proverb, "With Ivan, you need a new wife every year." Despite his reputation for cruelty, Ivan was also known for his intelligence and religious devotion. He amassed one of the largest libraries in Europe, with over 800 volumes, a remarkable collection for the time. He was a prolific writer, penning theological tracts and sharp-tongued letters. In 1570, he engaged in a famous theological debate with Protestant reformer Jan Rokita, demonstrating his deep knowledge of Orthodox doctrine. In moments of remorse, Ivan would pray for hours and even considered abdicating to become a monk. He founded the famous St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow, with its distinctive, colorful onion domes, to commemorate his conquest of Kazan. As Ivan's reign drew to a close, Russia was a land devastated by war, famine, and oppression. The once mighty realm had been brought to its knees by its own rulers' paranoia and brutality. The Livonian War, 1558 to 1583, which Ivan had initiated in an attempt to gain access to the Baltic Sea, ended in defeat and territorial losses. The Oprichnina had decimated the country's aristocracy and economy. Ivan died on March 18, 1584, while playing chess. Legend has it that as he reached for the king piece, he collapsed, uttering his final words, "I am wounded, call the monks." His death plunged Russia into the time of troubles, a period of dynastic crisis and foreign invasion. Ivan the Terrible's legacy is a complex one. While he laid the groundwork for the Russian Empire, his reign was marked by unimaginable cruelty and the near destruction of his own realm. He centralized power in the hands of the Tsar, a model that would be followed by future Russian autocrats. The shadow of Ivan's terror would loom large over Russian history, influencing future leaders from Peter the Great to Joseph Stalin. As the historian Robert Payne wrote, Ivan the Terrible stands at the beginning of Russian history like a colossus of evil, bestriding the future. The Tyrant's Crown, King John's reign of terror in medieval England. In the annals of English history, few monarchs have left a legacy as dark and controversial as that of King John. Born on December 24, 1166, at Beaumont Palace in Oxford, John would go on to rule England from 1199 to 1216, leaving a trail of cruelty, betrayal, and incompetence that would forever tarnish the crown he wore. As the historian C. Warren Hollister aptly put it, "In all of English history, there is no more troublesome figure to define than King John." The youngest son of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, John was never expected to inherit the throne. Nicknamed Lackland due to his initial lack of territories, he would prove to be a king who lacked not just land, but also the loyalty of his subjects and the respect of his peers. This nickname was bestowed upon him by his father, who had already distributed vast lands among John's older brothers. Little did Henry II know that his youngest son would one day rule over an empire stretching from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees. John's ascension to the throne in 1199 was marked by immediate controversy. His older brother, Richard the Lionheart, had died without a legitimate heir, but there was another claimant to the throne, John's young nephew, Arthur of Brittany. John quickly moved to secure his position, but the shadow of Arthur would haunt his reign and lead to one of the most chilling episodes of his rule. The succession crisis was further complicated by the fact that Arthur had the support of Philip II of France, setting the stage for a conflict that would define much of John's reign. In 1202, John captured the 16-year-old Arthur during a siege at Mirebeau Castle in Poitou. What happened next has been the subject of speculation and horror for centuries. According to contemporary chroniclers, John, in a fit of drunken rage, murdered Arthur with his own hands. The monk Ralph of Coggeshall wrote that John captured Arthur and killed him with his own hand. Some accounts even suggest that John tied stones to Arthur's body and threw it into the Seine. The chronicler William of Newburgh added a particularly gruesome detail, claiming that John had Arthur's eyes gouged out before his murder. The disappearance of Arthur remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of medieval history, but it cemented John's reputation for ruthlessness. As Shakespeare would later write in his play King John, putting words into the mouth of a character speaking of the king, "The bloody finger of his power doth stain the beauty of thy peace." John's cruelty was not reserved for his rivals alone. He was known for his capricious and often sadistic treatment of his subjects. In 1210, he ordered 28 Welsh hostages, sons of noble families, to be hanged at Nottingham Castle. These were children, some as young as 12, who had been given as sureties of good behaviour. Their execution was a shocking breach of medieval custom and a clear demonstration of John's disregard for the norms of chivalry and honour. The Welsh poet Llywoch ap Llywelyn, also known as Prydyd y Moch, lamented this atrocity in his verses, further fueling Welsh resentment against English rule. The king's appetites were as infamous as his cruelty. He was known for his gluttony and his insatiable lust. Chronicles of the time describe how he would snatch men's wives and daughters for his pleasure. One particularly notorious incident involved Matilda de Braose, the wife of one of his barons. When her husband, William de Braose, fell out of favour, John had Matilda and her eldest son imprisoned in Corfe Castle in Dorset. There, in a gruesome act of vengeance, he allegedly starved them to death. When their bodies were found, it was said that Matilda had gnawed on her son's cheeks in her desperation for food. This incident, recorded in the annals of Margam Abbey, shocked even John's contemporaries and contributed to the baronial revolt that would eventually lead to the Magna Carta. John's reign was marked by constant conflict, both at home and abroad. His attempts to reclaim lands lost to the French crown ended in humiliating defeat. In 1204, he lost Normandy, the ancestral home of the English monarchy since William the Conqueror. This loss earned him another unflattering nickname, Soft Sword. The defeat at Normandy was particularly stinging as it came after a series of military blunders. John had failed to provide adequate support to his forces on the continent, preferring to remain in England. His absence during critical battles led the chronicler Matthew Paris to write, "Foul as it is, hell itself is made fouler by the presence of King John." At home, John's rule was characterized by oppressive taxation and arbitrary justice. He exploited the royal forest laws to extort money from his subjects, imposing harsh fines for minor infractions. The historian W.L. Warren wrote that John had a talent for maximizing profits from all the traditional sources of royal revenue. One particularly egregious example was his exploitation of wardship rights. As feudal overlord, John had the right to manage the estates of underage heirs and arrange their marriages. He used this power to sell wardships and marriages to the highest bidder, often with little regard for the welfare of the wards themselves. Perhaps the most infamous example of John's avarice was his treatment of the Jews of Bristol in 1210. He demanded an enormous sum of money from the Jewish community, and when one wealthy Jew, Abraham of Bristol, refused to pay, John ordered that one of Abraham's teeth be pulled out each day until he agreed. According to contemporary accounts, Abraham endured the loss of 7 teeth before finally capitulating. This incident was part of a broader pattern of exploitation of the Jewish community. In 1210, John imposed a tax of 66,000 marks on the Jews of England, a sum equivalent to about a quarter of the crown's annual revenue. John's reign reached its nadir in 1215, when his barons, fed up with his tyrannical rule, forced him to sign the Magna Carta at Runnymede. This groundbreaking document, often seen as the foundation of English liberties, was a direct response to John's abuses of power. It limited the king's authority and established the principle that everyone, including the monarch, was subject to the law. The charter included 63 clauses dealing with issues ranging from the rights of the church to the regulation of feudal payments. Clause 39, which stated that no free man shall be seized or imprisoned, or stripped of his rights or possessions, or outlawed or exiled, or deprived of his standing in any way. Nor will we proceed with force against him, or send others to do so except by the lawful judgment of his equals, or by the law of the land, is particularly famous, and is seen as a precursor to modern concepts of due process. However, John had no intention of honoring the agreement. He appealed to Pope Innocent III, who annulled the charter, plunging England into civil war. The barons, in desperation, invited Prince Louis of France to take the English throne. As Louis' forces advanced, John's fortunes waned. In October 1216, while fleeing the rebel forces, John's baggage train was caught by the tide as he crossed the Wash estuary. He lost his crown jewels, and more importantly, the crown itself, a fitting metaphor for his disastrous reign. The loss of the crown jewels was a symbolic blow to John's already weakened authority, and added to the sense that his reign was cursed. Days later, on October 18, 1216, John died at Newark Castle, allegedly after a bout of dysentery brought on by overindulging in peaches and new cider. Even in death, he could not escape ridicule. The chronicler Matthew Paris wrote, "Foul as it is, hell itself is made fouler by the presence of King John." John's death at Newark was seen by many as divine judgment. The castle, now in ruins, still stands as a testament to this pivotal moment in English history. John's legacy is one of failure and cruelty. His reign saw England lose vast territories in France, suffer under oppressive taxation, and descend into civil war. Yet paradoxically, his very excesses led to one of the most important documents in English history, the Magna Carta. As the historian Dan Jones put it, John was not so much an evil king as a disastrous one. His reign was a catastrophe. The Magna Carta, though initially a failure, would go on to be reissued multiple times and would become a cornerstone of English constitutional law. The image of King John as a tyrant has endured through the centuries, immortalized in popular culture from Shakespeare's play King John to the tales of Robin Hood, where he is often portrayed as the villainous Prince John. His reign serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked royal power and the importance of the rule of law. As the 13th century chronicler Roger of Wendover summed up John's reign, "He was a tyrant rather than a king, a destroyer rather than a governor, an oppressor of his own people and a friend to strangers." Despite his failings, John's reign had some positive aspects that are often overlooked. He was an able administrator and introduced several innovations in royal government, including the use of pipe rolls to record royal finances. He also established the Port of Liverpool in 1207, granting it a royal charter. These actions, however, are often overshadowed by his more notorious deeds. As we close this chapter of history, let's reflect on the dark tapestry woven by some of humanity's most notorious rulers. From Vlad the Impaler's forest of stakes in 15th century Wallachia to Nero's fiddle echoing through a burning Rome in 64 AD, these tyrants have left indelible marks on our collective memory. As we bid farewell to these grim spectres of the past, let's remember the words of Lord Acton: "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." May we learn from history's darkest chapters to build a brighter future. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the shadows of power. Until next time, keep your wits sharp and your morals sharper.